I'm super excited about today's video. We're going to be talking about one of my favorite crops to grow. It's Itoy onions. My journey with Itoy onions began in 2015 when I took the Master Gardener classes. They gave each of us a handful of dried up Itoy onions, and I was really disappointed. I looked in my hand and I thought, there is no way that these couple of shriveled up things are going to grow. Little did I know that from those just a couple of shriveled up onions, thousands and thousands of Itoy onions would be grown and shared with others. It's also one of those crops that I've continued to learn more about the more that I've grown it. And in today's video, I'm going to share the lessons I've learned about growing Itoy onions. My name's Angela from Growing in the Garden. I garden in Mesa, Arizona in Zone 9B. Itoy onions have a long history in the Sonoran Desert. Although this onion may not have originated here, it has been grown here for a very long time. It thrives in the difficult growing conditions of the Sonoran Desert. The first step to growing this amazing multiplying onion is to find the bulbs, right? Like I did. I was lucky enough to be given a couple of dried up old Itoy onions and they still grew. So some years it can be harder than others to source these onions. The best place to start looking is with other gardeners. Ask around in local gardening groups and gardening clubs, and hopefully you'll be able to find a couple of bulbs. Check native seed search online. The next step in growing them successfully is to understand how they grow. From just one bulb, it's almost like magic. You plant it once and it multiplies into 8 or 10 or even more bulbs. And then once you harvest it, each of those bulbs can be divided and planted, resulting in a large amount of onions. These onions are pretty hardy and can be planted at just about any time. But the best time to plant is going to be with the monsoon moisture beginning in late summer, July, August, September, all the way through the fall and even up through January and February. Onions will grow throughout the cooler months and really grow basically all year long. In cold winter areas, you're going to wait and plant those Itoy onions in the spring. Just like garlic, when I'm ready to plant, I carefully separate each bulb and then plant them individually. Plant the bulbs about 1 inch deep and space them 6 to 8 inches apart. I usually do square foot gardening, and so I will plant 4 bulbs per square. These onions typically don't send up a flowering stalk and produce seeds. They normally are propagated by the division of bulbs. But if the seeds are allowed to develop in the flowers, they can be used for planting. My experience growing the Itoy onions from those bolted seeds, some success, but not amazing. It's not as simple to grow them as it is with the bulbs. Itoy onions are pretty amazing in that you can plant them in native soil with not a lot of additional amendments, not even a lot of extra rainfall, and they will probably grow. But if you plant them in rich, fertile soil, the resulting onions are going to be much larger and you're going to have a larger harvest from that bulb. So I plant my Itoy onions in my raised beds where I have really nice raised bed mix that I've amended with compost. The rich soil produces large bulbs and lots of onions. They also grow really well in containers. When I have Itoy onions to plant, I will just go around my garden tucking it in the corners of raised beds, and then it's always exciting to see all those green stalks growing up through that soil all around my garden. Choose an area that gets plenty of sunlight. That will help the onions grow well. They'll tolerate shady conditions, but the growth will definitely suffer if they are crowded out by other plants or if they're in too shady of conditions. By the time it gets really hot in the summer, the stalks of these onions have dried back to the ground, so they will tolerate being in the ground during the hottest months of the year, even in full sun. They'll tolerate dry conditions, but they will respond to moisture from monsoon rains and from watering your beds. Regular watering is definitely going to produce larger bulbs and more shoots. Once you've planted them, they thrive almost effortlessly and require very little care. Pest and disease problems are really uncommon, And so they're really simple to grow once you've got them planted. One of my favorite uses is to use them as a companion plant. Onions are an excellent companion plant for many crops in your garden. Brassicas, beets, strawberries, and tomatoes. I usually plant several Itoy onions in and among my strawberry patch as a companion plant. Really, the best time to harvest them depends on what you're using them for. If you want them for fresh eating, harvest them when they have the greens and bulbs anytime throughout the growing season. Harvest individual stalks off of that big developing growing stalk as needed. Hold the clump with one hand and pull off a couple of those onions, and then the entire stalk is edible. Harvest a couple of onions, but allow that main bunch to keep going so that I still have that bunch in there. So at the end of the season, it doesn't look like I've used any at all, even though I've been harvesting and using them all season long. The greens have a mild, peppery flavor, and they'll work well in most recipes that call for chives or green onions. The bulbs have a mild, peppery flavor similar to shallots, and they're delicious. I like to saute them in recipes that call for shallots or onions. If you just need the shoots, you can also trim off the shoots off of the onion, and that onion will put out new shoots as well. So to use the bulb, you wash it off. I trim off the roots and peel it. I will replant those roots out in the garden. What I've learned through the years is that you can harvest them at different times. When those onions are big and beautiful, you can harvest all of those onions and let them cure, and those greens will die back and you're going to have bulbs to plant. You can also leave those onions in the ground and allow those stalks to die back naturally. You'll see them die back and then eventually completely wither. And then you know that all of that energy has gone into the bulb and those bulbs are ready to be harvested. So you can harvest at either time. What I've found is if you leave those bulbs in the ground and allow them to die back naturally, you're going to have larger bulbs and more of them. If you're harvesting them more like when they look like a green onion, when that stalk is still really bright green and then you're allowing them to cure and die back, you'll still have that bulb, but it's going to be much smaller than those onions that are left in the ground. Usually they're ready to harvest between May and July. If you don't harvest the onions and you leave them in the ground, once those stalks die back, they're going to go dormant for a little while, and then you're going to see green stalks form as those onions begin growing again. You could leave them in place and allow them to grow right there, but I like to pull those up and divide them. I want those onions, rather than one large clump of onions to get larger, I want to divide that clump and have many, many large clumps of onions. I've usually cured my onions outside. The key is to find a shady spot where you can lay them out flat that has some airflow. I have this repurposed dresser turned potting table with openings, and that is where I've been curing my Itoy onions, and it's worked out really well. I'll put them on a rack, cure them until the stems wither, and that papery skin is going to tighten around the onion, and the stem basically is going to remove easily from the onion. If you're harvesting the onions when they still have green stalks, you for sure want to allow those stalks to die back and wither. You'll know it's ready when you easily can just remove that stalk right off of the onion. When you're not cutting it or anything like that, you're just pulling it off and then you have that onion remaining. It's important how you store that cured Itoy onion. You don't want to put it in a plastic sack and put it away. It's going to get moldy. Don't ask me how I know that one. I like to store just a few onions in paper sacks. Don't overload the sack because, again, that excess moisture can cause them to mold. You can hang them up in like mesh storage bags with plenty of airflow. You can continue to use those onions until it's time to plant. It's important to store those cured onions in a cool, dry place. Check your stored onions regularly. Discard or use or plant those onions right away that are showing signs of rotting or mold. There's 3 things that I like to do with each Itoy onion harvest. I like to save some to plant again next season. We use them, and then I also share them with other gardeners. Itoy onions are definitely at the top of my list of favorite crops to grow and most rewarding. I hope you enjoy growing them too. If you have tips for growing them, please leave them in the comments. I would love to hear it. Thank you so much for watching.